They mocked him for looking poor, laughed at his clothes, and tried to push him out of the bank. But when he quietly pulled out his ID, the bank manager didn't just apologize. He stood up, in shock, because the man they called a beggar was actually the founder of their entire banking system. This isn't just a story about money. It's a story about respect and a lesson they'll never forget. It was just another busy day at Prime National Bank, one of those polished, well-lit branches in the heart of the city, where everything seemed orderly, predictable, even a little robotic. The cool air from the silent hum of air conditioners wrapped around the marble floors, and the soft scent of fresh brewed coffee drifted through the waiting lounge, where suited professionals scrolled through phones and whispered into Bluetooth earpieces. Employees behind glass desks tapped away at keyboards with mechanical precision. Everything was smooth, uninterrupted, until the door opened and he walked in. At first glance, no one paid attention, but within seconds, heads turned. An old man entered, slowly, as if every step carried the weight of years. He wore worn-out rubber slippers that slapped gently against the tiled floor, a dusty shirt that had seen better days, and a stitched-up trouser that looked like it had been repaired more times than it had been washed. His beard was gray and unkempt, wiry, like it had grown without care for years. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but age. But it was his eyes that stood out most. Quiet, tired, yet deep, like he had lived through stories no one ever bothered to ask about. He walked with a subtle limp, and though he wasn't in anyone's way, people instinctively leaned aside, giving him space as if he didn't belong. He moved toward the front desk, slowly and politely, but before he could speak, the security guard, young, stiff, and trained to keep order, stepped in and blocked him with an extended arm. "Sir, where are you going?" the guard asked, cautiously, scanning him from head to toe like a scanner searching for something out of place. The old man looked up with quiet patience and said softly, "I want to open an account." For a moment, silence. The security guard blinked, confused, unsure if he'd heard that right. He looked over at the receptionist, who raised her eyebrows with mild amusement and walked over. She leaned over the counter and tried to hold back a smirk. "Sir," she said politely, but with thinly veiled sarcasm, "accounts here require a minimum deposit, at least 5,000 rupees just to start. Maybe try a smaller branch somewhere else?" She meant well, but her tone carried the sting of condescension. Two men sitting nearby chuckled under their breath. Another customer whispered just loud enough to be heard, "Maybe he's lost." A woman beside him added with a grin, "Or maybe he's here to beg." And though the comments floated around him like cold wind, the old man didn't flinch, didn't respond, didn't even blink. His calm remained intact, like he had heard worse in his life and simply didn't care anymore. He adjusted the strap of his fading leather bag and said, this time more firmly, "I need to speak to the bank manager, in private." That sentence dropped like a pin in a silent room. The receptionist blinked. The guard looked puzzled. Even the customers stopped smirking for a moment, wondering if they had misunderstood. Why would he, this man who looked like he could barely afford a cup of tea, want to speak privately with the manager of a high-profile bank? It sounded absurd. It sounded like a joke. But the old man's face was not joking. He was serious, dead serious. His voice didn't shake, his eyes didn't dart. He simply stood there, waiting, quiet but commanding, as if the dust on his clothes somehow didn't matter in that moment. A whisper spread around the hall. The guard leaned toward the receptionist and murmured, "Should we call him?" She hesitated, then picked up the internal phone line. "Manager's office, please. There's someone here requesting you directly. Yes, in person. No, I don't know who he is." Within moments, a door opened at the back of the hall, and a tall, clean-shaven man in a navy blue suit stepped out. Polished shoes, gold-rimmed watch. The aura of someone who had risen fast and liked being at the top. He was already checking his phone as he walked forward, annoyed that his time was being disturbed. But as his eyes met the old man standing calmly by the desk, he slowed slightly, then frowned. "You wanted to see me?" the manager asked, folding his arms. "Yes," the old man replied with simple dignity, "but I'd prefer to speak in your office. It's important." There was a pause. The manager tilted his head slightly, confused, glancing quickly at the receptionist, as if asking silently, "What is this about?" "Do you even have an account here?" he asked coldly. The old man shook his head. "Not yet, but I'm about to open one." Behind them, someone chuckled again. "Maybe he thinks he's a millionaire," another whispered sarcastically. But something in the manager's gut told him not to dismiss this man just yet. With a sigh, he said, "Fine, 2 minutes. Follow me." As the two of them walked through the glass door into the private office, every eye in the lobby followed them. Because in that moment, no one laughed anymore. They just watched. They didn't want to call the manager. Everyone knew that. The receptionist hesitated, the security guard shrugged awkwardly, and the tellers shared quick glances, silently questioning if it was worth bothering a man like Mr. Raza over someone like this. But the old man had asked firmly, calmly, like he knew exactly what he was doing. And so, with a reluctant breath, the receptionist picked up the internal phone and dialed. "Sir, there's someone at the front desk. He's asking to see you personally," she said, almost apologetically. "No, not a client. He's just—" She paused, unsure how to describe him. "An elderly gentleman, dressed plainly." Silence. Then a sigh. "Send him in," came the voice from the other end. Moments later, the office door at the back of the branch clicked open and the bank manager stepped out, tall, sharp, and clearly annoyed. His navy blue tailored suit hugged his frame perfectly, and a luxury wristwatch peeked out from under his cuff. He was still scrolling on his phone as he walked forward, only glancing up when he noticed who exactly was waiting for him. His eyes landed on the old man, and he stopped. A flicker of irritation passed across his face. He wasn't expecting this. He folded his arms, his tone clipped. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, more as a challenge than a question. The old man nodded, politely but without hesitation. "Yes, but I'd prefer to talk in your office," he said in a calm, steady voice. "It's important." The manager blinked, his eyebrows lifted, not in curiosity, but in offense. He wasn't used to demands, especially not from people who looked like they had nothing to offer. "Sir," he said slowly, with a condescending smile, "do you even have an account here?" The question hung in the air like a slap. The surrounding staff stiffened slightly, pretending not to listen, but clearly absorbing every word. A few waiting customers leaned forward, already sensing something unusual was happening. "No," the old man said quietly, "but I'm about to open one." It was such a simple reply. No defensiveness, no explanation, just truth. And yet laughter bubbled up nearby. A young man seated near the front chuckled under his breath. "He thinks he's a millionaire," he whispered, nudging the man next to him. Another customer smirked, shaking his head. "These people waste everyone's time," he muttered. Even one of the junior staff, a teller named Imran, looked up from his desk and barely held back a smirk. But the old man didn't react, not even a glance. The manager stared at him for a moment longer, eyes narrowing slightly, trying to decide if this was a prank, a test, or just a confused old man playing games. He exhaled sharply. "Fine," he muttered, brushing past the receptionist. 2 minutes. He turned on his heel and motioned for the old man to follow. A hush fell over the lobby. As the two figures walked side by side, one in spotless leather shoes, the other in crumbling slippers, every eye in the branch followed them. The door to the private glass office closed behind them with a soft click. And then, something changed. The mocking died down. The smirks disappeared. A strange silence swept across the bank floor, not loud, but heavy, weighty. People shifted in their seats. A child in the corner stopped fidgeting. Even the keyboards behind the desks paused for a beat, as if the building itself sensed that something important, something they wouldn't forget, was about to happen. No one could explain it, but that moment felt different. It was the kind of silence that speaks louder than a crowd, a silence that made everyone lean in, because for reasons they didn't yet understand, they knew this was no ordinary man. Inside the glass-walled manager's office, the atmosphere shifted immediately. The hum of the bank floor outside became distant, almost muffled, as if the glass separated two entirely different worlds. The old man stepped in quietly, moving with the slowness of someone who had no rush, but carried the kind of patience that demanded respect. He lowered himself gently into the visitor's chair, careful with his back, careful with his breath. The manager, still standing, closed the door behind him and took his seat with a half-hearted sense of authority, clearly not expecting anything more than a short, awkward conversation. "So, what is it you needed?" he asked, tapping his fingers against the polished desk. But the old man didn't respond right away. He reached slowly into his side pocket and pulled out a small, aged leather wallet. It looked weathered, creased, sun-faded, almost too fragile to hold anything valuable. And yet, the way he handled it was deliberate, almost sacred. He placed it gently on the desk, unbuttoned the flap, and pulled out a single laminated card. Then, without a word, he slid it across the table. The manager glanced at it lazily, out of courtesy more than curiosity. But the second his eyes landed on the name, everything stopped. His face froze. His eyes, which were confident and dismissive just seconds ago, suddenly widened with shock. He blinked once, then again, leaning forward, reading the card more carefully now, as if his brain was struggling to process what he was seeing. His posture stiffened, and then, without thinking, he stood up, abruptly, instinctively. Sir, the manager stuttered, his voice cracking as he took a step back. I didn't recognize you. I'm so sorry. His sentence fell apart, unable to form a coherent apology. Without waiting, he scrambled to pour a glass of water from the pitcher behind him, nearly spilling it in his nervous rush. He set it gently in front of the old man, now no longer looking at him as a stranger, but as someone far, far more important. Outside, through the transparent glass, the bank floor had begun to notice something strange. The manager, always calm, always composed, was standing, pouring water, looking rattled. A junior staff member squinted toward the office, whispering to the person beside him, "What's happening in there?" Another leaned forward, curious, watching intently. The smirks from earlier had long vanished. The atmosphere turned tense, silent. Because something inside that office had clearly changed. The identity of the old man, which had seemed so inconsequential moments ago, had taken on an entirely different weight. And now, for the first time, people started to ask the real question: who was he? The answer lay on that card. A laminated identification issued by none other than the central bank of the country itself, and written on it, in bold capital letters, Mr. Zubair M. Hanif, founder and former chairman, Al Amin Group of Banks. Yes, that Al Amin Group, one of the oldest, most respected financial networks in the nation. The very name that once built dozens of institutions, that trained generations of bankers, that had been taught in textbooks across banking academies. And the man sitting before them, the man they had mocked, ignored, underestimated, was none other than the architect of it all. He wasn't poor, he wasn't lost, he wasn't a beggar looking for a small account. He was a legend in disguise, a builder of the very foundations this bank stood on. Decades ago, he had led empires of finance. Today, he walked in alone, wearing dust and humility, and no one recognized him. Until now. The silence inside the office was thick. The manager, still standing, looked shaken to his core. His confidence melted into guilt. His professionalism was suddenly clumsy. His power felt fake in front of a man who had once commanded boardrooms of 100 CEOs. Outside, the employees kept glancing in, their faces now painted with confusion, fear, and disbelief. The few who had mocked him earlier tried to piece it all together. The laughter had died, the whispering had stopped, and for the first time, everyone realized the same truth. They had just disrespected a man whose footsteps once echoed through the halls of banking history. The office, now filled with a thick and uneasy silence, felt like a world apart from the bustling bank floor just beyond the glass. The manager, still visibly shaken, lowered himself into his chair with a stiffness that betrayed his racing thoughts. His eyes hadn't left the ID card lying between them on the desk. It was still there, real, undeniable. For the first time in his career, he had no words prepared, no scripts, no polished phrases, just disbelief and regret simmering quietly beneath the surface. He swallowed hard, as if trying to make sense of the moment, and finally broke the silence, his voice lower, more respectful than ever before. "But, sir, why come here like this?" he asked carefully, gesturing toward the old man's simple clothes, his tattered slippers, the faint dust still clinging to the cuff of his shirt. "Dressed like this?" The old man didn't seem offended. In fact, a quiet, almost knowing smile touched his lips. He leaned back slightly, eyes calm, his posture light, as if he'd been waiting for that exact question. "I've been living a quiet life," he said softly, "ever since I stepped down 20 years ago. I walked away from the spotlight. I left the boardrooms. I gave away most of my wealth. Homes, land, stakes in the company. I didn't want more noise. I wanted peace." The manager blinked, stunned. 20 years. 2 full decades, and no one had noticed. No headlines, no scandals, just silence. "But recently," the old man continued, his tone steady but carrying a certain quiet gravity now, "I started to feel a restlessness, not regret, just a question I couldn't ignore anymore." The manager leaned in slightly, unable to help himself. "A question?" he asked. The old man nodded slowly. "Yes, a test, actually. I wanted to see something for myself. I wanted to walk back into the world I once helped build, not as a founder, not as a billionaire, but as a nobody, a man with no name, no suit, no appointment, just another face. I wanted to see if the values we built this system upon still lived inside it, or if they've been replaced by something else." The manager listened, frozen, his face draining of color with each passing word. "I needed to know if these banks," the old man said, glancing through the glass toward the front desks where laughter and mockery had echoed not long ago, still served people with dignity, or if they've become places of arrogance. There was a pause, a long, uncomfortable pause. And then he added, almost as an afterthought, but one that cut like a blade, "And today, I got my answer." The words hit like thunder. The manager looked outside, toward the staff members who were now pretending to type or shuffle papers, clearly watching every movement inside the office from the corners of their eyes. Their earlier laughter was gone, their posture stiff, their smiles vanished. Outside, the customers who had chuckled, whispered, and doubted now stared toward the frosted office glass with a nervous curiosity, because they all sensed something had happened, something they weren't supposed to see, but couldn't unsee now that it had begun. Inside, the manager sat still, the weight of shame pressing down on his chest. It wasn't just about a mistake. It wasn't even about disrespecting a legendary figure. It was about missing the point entirely, about losing sight of the very soul of the profession they were supposed to protect. Everything the old man had said was true. Their systems had become colder, their culture more judgmental, their faces more rehearsed. And today, all of it had been exposed, not with anger, not with punishment, but with silence. The old man didn't need to raise his voice to make his message heard. He didn't need to list their failures. He just needed to walk in, like a stranger, and let them reveal who they truly were. And that's exactly what they did. The old man stood up slowly from the chair, his presence now commanding a quiet reverence that hadn't been there moments ago. His voice remained soft, but there was something in his tone, something deeper than anger. "I'm not angry," he said, his eyes fixed on the stunned bank manager, "but I am deeply disappointed." There was a long pause. The manager lowered his gaze, unable to meet the old man's eyes. And then, with deliberate calm, the old man reached into the inside pocket of his weathered coat and pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper. He gently unfolded it and placed it on the desk before the manager, who stared at it in confusion. What is this?" the manager asked hesitantly, his voice trembling with the weight of what he had just witnessed. "A check," the old man replied, almost in a whisper, "for 5 million rupees." The manager blinked, speechless. His eyes moved from the check to the old man's calm expression, then back again. "This check," the old man continued, "was meant to be donated to a bank branch, my bank, that still treats every single customer with dignity. One that shows respect to all, regardless of how they dress, how they look, or what people assume about them." His words hung heavy in the room, more powerful than any shouting could have been. The manager sat frozen, his face draining of color. In the silence that followed, the noise from outside the glass walls of the office began to fade. One by one, the staff members who had been laughing earlier now stood motionless, the realization of what had just happened beginning to sink in. Even the mocking customers had stopped to stare, their smirks erased by shame. The old man gently slid the check back into his pocket. "But now," he said softly, "I will donate it somewhere else, somewhere it might still mean something, somewhere dignity still lives, not just in policy, but in practice." There was no anger in his tone, just truth, uncomfortable, undeniable truth. He stepped away from the desk, his movements slow but sure, and without another word, he turned and walked out of the office. There was no dramatic exit, no demand for apology, no retaliation, just silence, powerful, echoing silence. And this time, no one laughed. No one dared to. Every eye followed the old man as he passed through the bank, the very same space where he had once been mocked and dismissed. Now people stepped aside in quiet respect. Some lowered their heads. Others simply watched, frozen in place. He opened the main door, stepped outside, and vanished into the daylight, just as quietly as he had arrived. But the echo of his words stayed behind, etched into every corner of that building. And from that day on, something changed. The laughter that once came so easily when mocking others, it stopped. The quick judgments based on clothes or appearance, they faded, because the staff and even the customers had learned a lesson they would never forget. A lesson not shouted, but shown. A truth not forced, but felt. That sometimes the most ordinary faces carry the most extraordinary stories. That behind the plainest clothes could be a man who once built empires and still walks among us, humble and unseen. And that in a single moment, a silent act of truth can change everything, forever. Moral: never judge someone by how they look, because sometimes the most ordinary faces hide the most extraordinary stories.
I make this type of video for you, your family, and friends. I hope you enjoy it because this will take a lot of time, lot of effort, and lot of my brain memory. It's take almost 12 to 15 hours to make one simple video. If you like this video, I enjoy this. I hope it's take you a lesson. You learn with lesson from my story. If you enjoy this story, please like and share this video with your family and friends.